AI-generated work just earned an A grade at some of the world's most respected universities. The work contained no original thinking, no engagement with the material, no evidence of learning. The credential was issued anyway. In 2026, researchers at the London School of Economics published a study. AI-generated submissions earned an A grade or higher in 80% of cases. Teaching assistants correctly identified only half of them. The work met the stated standards, often exceeded them, while containing no original thinking, no meaningful engagement, and no evidence that learning had occurred. For generations, a degree meant one thing above all others, that the person holding it had actually learned something. That assumption is the foundation of every hiring decision that favors degree holders, every salary premium a degree commands, every family that borrowed to send their child to university. Today, employers increasingly report uncertainty about what recent graduates actually know. Can they write independently? Can they reason through unfamiliar problems? Can they demonstrate judgment under pressure? Or have they simply learned to operate increasingly powerful tools? The credential still exists. The confidence in what it certifies has begun to change. And the question this documentary investigates is not whether students should use AI. The question is, what happens when society's primary system for verifying expertise begins losing its ability to verify expertise? The tools transforming education arrived faster than almost anyone in the sector anticipated. Khan Academy launched Khanmigo, an AI tutor capable of guiding students through virtually every subject in primary and secondary education. By 2025, Khanmigo was operating in over 570 school districts, used daily by nearly 100,000 students and teachers. That is the hopeful version of this story, a student in rural Mississippi getting the same quality of support as a student in Manhattan. That possibility is real, but it is not the whole story. Harvard's CS50, the world's most popular computer science course with over 6 million learners, replaced over 100 teaching assistants with an AI tutor. Those teaching assistants were not just employees, they were the next generation of academics in training. When they disappear, the pathway that produced them disappears too. Alpha School in Texas claims to deliver a full day's instruction in 2 hours using AI tutors. Traditional teaching roles for content delivery largely eliminated, not to improve learning, to reduce costs. 93% of faculty and administrators expect to expand their use of AI in the next 2 years. The technology is not coming, it is here. And the question is not what AI can do in education. The question is what institutions have the incentive to use it for. The pattern in education is identical to every industry this series has investigated. In law, paralegals and junior associates disappeared first. In healthcare, billing staff and administrative workers. In finance, junior analysts and researchers. In education, teaching assistants, adjunct faculty, the contingent workforce the modern university depends on and consistently underpays. 68% of faculty in America are now in contingent positions, earning an average of $4,093 per course. 1 in 4 of those faculty families relies on public assistance programs. Consider what a teaching assistant actually does. They grade papers, hold office hours, lead discussion sections. Answer the same question 15 different ways for 15 students who each need to hear it differently. These are precisely the tasks AI now performs, instantly, at scale, without a stipend, health insurance, or a desk. But the teaching assistantship was never just a job. It was how the next generation of academics developed judgment. The kind that only comes from standing in front of students and trying to explain something clearly and failing and trying again. When AI removes that work, the profession does not just lose workers, it loses the mechanism by which it reproduces expertise. Here is the hidden system that explains why the credential crisis is accelerating without anyone officially acknowledging it. Universities are businesses. They depend on enrollment revenue. A student who uses AI to complete assignments and earns good grades remains enrolled, pays tuition, remains a customer. A university that aggressively detects and penalizes AI use risks losing students to institutions that are less vigilant. The financial incentive is not to solve the problem. The financial incentive is to preserve the credential's market value while its underlying meaning quietly changes. Students face the same incentive from the opposite direction. Employers require credentials. Credentials require coursework. AI makes coursework easier. The fastest path to the credential becomes increasingly attractive. Neither side needed coordination. Neither side intended to weaken the signal. The incentives pointed in the same direction. And when institutions and individuals follow the same incentive simultaneously, the outcome emerges naturally. The credential survives. The certifying function slowly erodes. Amara Johnson graduated from a state university in 2025 with a degree in communications, $140,000 in student debt, and the expectation that her credential would open doors. 6 months later, she was working in retail, not because she lacked intelligence, not because she lacked ambition, because the signal she spent 4 years purchasing had become harder for employers to interpret. During interviews, she encountered a question, not spoken directly, but present in every conversation. What does this degree actually prove? 42.5% of recent graduates are underemployed, working in positions that do not require the degrees they borrowed money to earn. The debt remained real. The signal became uncertain. And Amara Johnson is not the exception. She may be one of the first visible signs of a larger transition. A generation spent years earning credentials designed to signal expertise, and they are entering a labor market that increasingly trusts those signals less than the institutions that issued them. The problem is not that Amara failed. The problem is that the relationship between credentials and expertise is becoming harder to see. Employers feel it, graduates feel it, universities feel it. Nobody designed this outcome. Nobody voted for it. Nobody announced it. The incentives simply pointed in the same direction, and the system followed. Up to this point, education looks like another industry being disrupted by artificial intelligence. Universities are deploying AI, students are using AI, teaching assistants are disappearing, credentials are becoming easier to obtain. It feels like the same story we have seen everywhere else. But education is not like every other industry. Education is the system that produces the expertise every other institution depends on. Every lawyer begins here. Every doctor begins here. Every financial analyst begins here. Every engineer, every researcher, every executive, every profession this series has investigated starts in the same place, education. Which reveals something even more important. For generations, people assumed universities produced knowledge, but knowledge was never the institution's most valuable product. Universities produced trust. The degree was society's shortcut, a signal that allowed strangers to trust one another. A patient trusts a surgeon, a client trusts an attorney, a company trusts an engineer, an investor trusts an analyst. Not because they personally witnessed the learning, but because they trusted the system that verified it. The credential was never just proof of education. It was proof that someone had passed through a process society believed could be trusted. Which means the question is becoming larger than universities. The question is, what happens when the system responsible for producing trust begins losing its ability to verify expertise? Because expertise is not information. Information can be downloaded. Expertise is judgment. Judgment is formed through repetition, through mistakes, through feedback, through years of guided practice. The same apprenticeship model that once trained junior lawyers, the same apprenticeship model that once trained financial analysts, the same apprenticeship model that once trained journalists and researchers. Education was where that process began, and now that process is changing rapidly. Throughout this series, we have watched AI change incentives first, institutions second, society third. Universities faced financial pressure. AI offered efficiency. Institutions adapted. Teaching assistants disappeared. Coursework changed. Learning became increasingly automated. And now the consequences are beginning to emerge. Credentials become easier to earn. Expertise becomes harder to verify. Trust begins to erode. Not because people know less, but because nobody can be certain what a credential actually represents anymore. And if society loses confidence in its ability to recognize expertise, the consequences do not stop at the university gates. They spread outward into hospitals, courtrooms, financial markets, engineering firms, newsrooms, government agencies, every institution that depends on human judgment. Because education is not merely another industry adapting to AI. Education is the place where society manufactures expertise, and when the factory changes, everything built downstream changes with it. At this point, it is tempting to treat this as a future problem, a warning, a possibility, something that might happen if current trends continue. But that assumption misses what is already happening. The transition is no longer theoretical. Those teaching assistants were not just employees, they were the next generation of academics in training, when they disappeared for human demonstration of understanding. Project-based assessments requiring work that cannot be completed by a language model alone. In-person demonstrations of competency that require presence, judgment, and real-time reasoning. Because traditional written coursework has become easier to automate, employers are not waiting either. Skills assessments and portfolio reviews are increasingly supplementing degree requirements at companies across every major industry. The credential alone is no longer sufficient. Something additional is being required. Professional licensing bodies across multiple fields, law, medicine, finance, engineering, are beginning to examine how AI changes competency verification. The question being asked inside every credentialing system is the same. If AI can satisfy the requirements we designed, what do our requirements actually measure? Every institution in society depends on expertise, and education is the institution responsible for producing it. When the signal degrades, every institution that relied on that signal must find a new way to recognize what it was designed to certify. The question is no longer whether the credential system is changing. The question is whether a new system can emerge before confidence in the old one erodes completely. The degree survived, the signal did not. For generations, modern societies relied on systems that allowed strangers to trust one another. Degrees, licenses, certifications, credentials. Most people never met the engineer who designed the bridge, the surgeon performing the operation, the analyst managing the retirement fund, the lawyer arguing the case. Trust filled the gap, and credentials helped create that trust. But if the appearance of expertise becomes easier to produce than expertise itself, the challenge is no longer educational. The challenge is civilizational. Because every society depends on its ability to distinguish between competence and its appearance, between expertise and performance, between trust earned and trust assumed. And if that distinction becomes harder to make, the problem is no longer education. The problem is trust itself. The degree survived, the signal did not. Next on Disruption Files, the media industry, where artificial intelligence is writing more news than ever, and fewer people trust it than ever. Journalism's product is not information. Information is everywhere. Journalism's product is trust. And the industry responsible for producing trust is losing the people who perform that work.